Shamed and bleeding, Mercy Fallow knew only the crushing weight of a life stolen by lies. She carried marks that went far deeper than the jagged crimson wound on her shoulder, scars of a reputation dragged to the mud of London's elite. At her young age, she never could have imagined that a desperate flight into the rain-soaked moors of Derbyshire would not only alter her fate, but unearth a shadowy mystery capable of bringing the entire peerage to its knees. For when the brooding, widowed Duke of Radcliffe reined in his white stallion before the broken woman huddled in the dirt, he had no idea he was about to resurrect the very secrets he had buried with his late wife. These were truths that would hurl them both into a deadly game of cat and mouse, forcing them to question every vow they had ever made about honor, vengeance, and the price of a second chance. But before we uncover the Duke's dark secret, my granny says if I get 1,000 subscribers, she'll finally stop sharing my embarrassing childhood stories with the neighbors. So, please let me know where you're listening from in the comments, hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us share more tales of passion and fire with you. The sun had not yet touched the gray peaks of the Peak District when Mercy was already shivering in the damp corner of the scullery she was forced to call a bedroom. The cramped space at the back of the manor was tucked behind a coal cellar and lacked even a single window. The mold crawling up the stone walls created dark, weeping stains that looked like ghosts in the pre-dawn gloom. She rose from her thin, flea-bitten pallet, the only furniture in the suffocating space, and pulled on the same threadbare cotton dress she had worn since her disgrace. The fabric was so worn from hard labor that the morning chill bit straight through the frayed seams. Her feet, calloused and bare, recoiled as they touched the flagstone floor, icy with the frost of 1818. Mercy moved silently toward the main kitchen, her breath hitching in her chest, praying that she could finish her work before the household awoke to unleash their cruelty. Every movement was a calculation, every step measured to ensure the floorboards didn't groan and summon the wrath of Sir Barnaby Pym. Sir Barnaby was a man of polished surfaces and hollow soul, who had systematically dismantled Mercy's life after she refused to be his plaything. He was a master of the shame he dealt out, using his wealth to brand her a thief and a harlot across the county. Ever since Mercy had been cast out of polite society and forced into his service to pay her father's phantom debts, her existence had become a private purgatory. But as Mercy reached for the heavy iron kettle, she didn't know that this would be the last morning she spent in chains. She didn't know that by noon she would be running for her life, only to fall into the arms of a Duke whose own heart was a fortress of secrets. What she discovers in the Duke's eyes will change everything. But is she ready to learn that her shame was no accident, but a part of a plot that killed the Duchess of Radcliffe years ago? The mud of the Derbyshire road had no mercy for the fallen. Mercy Fallow's fingers clawed into freezing slush, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps that billowed like ghosts in the biting air. Her shoulder was a bloom of fire where the iron had struck her during her escape, the dark red blood soaking through her threadbare gray bodice in a gruesome stain. She was a ruin of a woman, her cream-pale skin smeared with the grime of the moors, her rough, callous hands, the tools of a slave, finally failing her. She closed her eyes, ready for the rain-soaked earth to take what Sir Barnaby Pym had left behind. But the earth did not claim her. Instead, the air vibrated with the heavy, rhythmic thrum of hooves. Through the veil of the storm, a white stallion appeared like a specter against the blackening sky. Its rider was a man carved from shadow and sorrow. Octavius Radcliffe, the Duke of Radcliffe, sat high in the saddle, his thick, dark hair brushing his collar, his brooding eyes sweeping the wreckage of the road. When he saw the broken figure huddled in the dirt, he didn't hesitate. He swung down from his horse, his movements powerful, precise, and dangerously graceful. For a fleeting second, Mercy saw him clearly, the full, dark mustache framing a face that rarely knew a smile and the watchful, Byronic expression of a man who lived in the silence of his own mourning. When he reached for her, she flinched, instinctively bracing for a blow. Instead, his arms were a fortress. He lifted her weight with an ease that stole her breath, his black wool coat an obsidian contrast to her bloodied rags. The touch was electric. It was the first time in 3 years she had been held with something other than malice. It was a touch of a protector, a spark of humanity that flickered in the dead ashes of her heart, momentarily awakening her from the abyss of her despair. As he turned toward the looming, stone silhouette of Radcliffe Manor, Mercy felt the world begin to tilt. The manor's heavy door swung open, spilling amber light onto the wet grass. A line of staff stood there, maids with their mouths set in hard lines, and the valet with a pinched, judgmental gaze. Their eyes didn't see a soul in need. They saw a shamed girl, a bloodied trespasser brought into a house of solemn ludo. Suspicion hung in the air, cold as the Derbyshire frost. Octavius didn't look at his servants. He looked only at her. As he stepped over the threshold, he leaned his head down, his dark mustache grazing the shell of her ear. In a voice like velvet over gravel, he whispered a single name, a name that belonged to the girl she was before the lies, a name she thought had died in the fire of her disgrace. "Rest now, Evangeline," he murmured. The sound of that forgotten name shattered what was left of her resolve. Darkness surged to meet her, and Evangeline Fallows slipped into a blackness that felt, for the first time in a long time, like a sanctuary. The light of Radcliffe Manor did not sting. It glowed. When Mercy's eyes fluttered open, she did not find the weeping stone walls of Pym's scullery or the suffocating darkness of a coal cellar. Instead, she lay cocooned in silk sheets that felt like liquid moonlight against her battered skin. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and expensive beeswax, a fragrance so far removed from the stench of her disgrace that it made her heart ache with a fresh, sharp pang of displacement. Her shoulder had been bound in clean linen, the fire in her flesh reduced to a dull, throbbing ache, but the luxury of the bed, looming with heavy mahogany posts and velvet hangings, made her feel like a thief in a cathedral. She was not alone for long. The door creaked open, and a woman stepped into the room with a gait so stiff it seemed she was braced against a permanent gale. This was Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, a woman whose face appeared to be carved from the very limestone of the Derbyshire peaks. Her gown was a severe midnight wool, and her keys jingled at her waist like a warning. She did not offer a smile. She offered a gaze that dissected Mercy with surgical precision, lingering on her rough, callous hands and the tangled mess of her dark hair. "So, the waif awakes," Mrs. Gable said, her voice as thin and sharp as a blade. "His Grace has seen fit to place you in the East Wing. Though why he chose a guest suite for a girl found in the gutter is beyond my understanding. You will tell me your name, and you will tell me how you came to be bleeding on the Duke's lands." Mercy swallowed, her throat dry. "I am Mercy," she whispered, clinging to the name of her penance. I was a servant in a house near the village. I fell. Servants do not fall and end up with iron strike wounds, nor do they carry the look of a woman who has seen the inside of a house of correction," Mrs. Gable retorted, her eyes narrowing. She stepped closer, her shadow falling over the bed. "His Grace, Octavius Radcliffe, is a man of deep ludo. He has been a widower for 2 years, and in that time no woman has crossed his threshold. There are rooms in this house that remain locked for a reason, and names that are never to be uttered within these walls. If you think to use your injuries to play upon the Duke's sympathies, know that the memory of the late Duchess is a ghost you cannot compete with." Mercy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The forbidden air of the house settled over her like a shroud. Octavius was a man haunted by a woman. He could not let go, yet he had whispered a different name to Mercy in the dark. As Mrs. Gable turned to adjust the heavy drapes, Mercy's gaze drifted to the floor, settling on the edge of an exquisite Persian rug. There, near the foot of the bed, was a dark, jagged blemish, a stain that had been scrubbed until the wool was frayed, yet the ghost of the color remained. It was a deep brownish crimson. Mercy touched her own clean bandages, then looked back at the floor. The stain was old, weathered by time, and far too large to belong to her. She realized with a jolt of terror that she was sleeping in a room where someone else's life had ebbed away. Whose blood was it? The private dining room was a cavern of flickering shadows and polished oak, where the scent of roasted venison mingled with the sharp tang of old brandy. Mercy sat stiffly at the edge of her chair, her rough, calloused hands hidden beneath the folds of a borrowed gown of midnight blue. Across the table, Octavius Radcliffe loomed in the candlelight, his Byronic features more pronounced in the amber glow. His thick, dark hair caught the light as he leaned forward, the full, dark mustache that framed his grim mouth twitching as he watched her with a brooding, watchful intensity. He had not yet touched his wine, his powerful hands resting on the table with a stillness that was more intimidating than any outburst of rage. "The time for vagueness is past," Octavius said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in Mercy's very chest. "I did not pluck you from the Derbyshire mud to host a ghost at my table. Tell me of your shame, Mercy. Tell me what a man like Barnaby Pym does to a woman to make her run until her heart nearly bursts." Mercy felt a shiver of pure terror. She looked at the Duke's physically powerful frame, his broad shoulders filling the space, and she saw the shadow of Sir Barnaby. Pym had spoken with the same authority, had used his wealth to buy silence and his title to crush the innocent. Was Octavius merely a more handsome version of the predator she had fled? "I was accused of things I did not do," she whispered, her fingers knotting in the silk of her skirts. "The word of a baronet carries more weight than the plea of a scullery maid. He branded me a thief when I refused to be his diversion." Octavius's expression darkened, a flash of genuine loathing crossing his face. "The peerage," he spat, the word dripping with contempt. "A collection of titled vermin who believe their blood gives them the right to treat the world as their larder. I have spent my life loathing the very class I was born into. They wear honor like a cloak, yet hide nothing but rot beneath it." For a moment, Mercy wanted to believe the conviction in his voice, but the fear was too deep. He was still a duke. He still held her life in his massive hands. "And what of you, Your Grace?" she challenged, her voice trembling but brave. "Is this a rescue? Or have I simply traded a small cage for a much grander one? Sir Barnaby promised me protection once, too." Octavius did not answer immediately. He rose, his height dwarfing the room, and gestured toward his adjoining study. "I am no Pym," was all he said, as he turned to lead her from the room. Mercy's gaze was drawn to a large, gilded frame leaning against the far wall of the study. It was draped in a heavy shroud of black velvet, but the corner had slipped, revealing a sliver of the canvas beneath. Mercy's heart stopped. From the darkness of the painting, a pair of eyes stared back, eyes that possessed her own cream-colored skin, her own dark tresses, and her own haunting expression. It was a portrait of a woman who looked so much like her that for a terrifying second, Mercy thought she was looking into a mirror of the past. Who was this woman, and why did the Duke keep her hidden in the shadows? The weeks of convalescence passed in a blur of gray Derbyshire mist and the slow, rhythmic pulse of the manor. Mercy's cream-colored skin gradually lost its ghostly pallor, though the rough, callous texture of her hands remained, a permanent reminder of the life she had barely escaped. She could not bear the weight of Octavius's charity. Every meal felt like a debt, and every silken thread of her borrowed gowns felt like a tether. To reclaim some shred of her dignity, she requested work, and Octavius, with a brooding, watchful intensity, granted her access to the vast, labyrinthine library. The library was a sanctuary of dust and leather, where the air smelled of ancient paper and secrets. While Octavius was away inspecting the tenant farms, his physically powerful frame silhouetted against the horizon, Mercy set to work cataloging the disarray of his personal correspondence. It was there, tucked behind a heavy ledger of estate accounts, that she found a bundle of letters tied with a black silk ribbon. Her fingers trembled as she untied the knot. She expected business receipts or perhaps poems to his late wife, but as she spread the papers across the mahogany desk, her blood turned to ice. They were reports from London, detailed, meticulous accounts of Sir Barnaby Pym's movements. Octavius had not found her on that mud-slicked road by mere chance. He had been employing runners to watch Pym's townhouse and his country estate for months. There were descriptions of Pym's gambling debts, his late-night visitors, and even the date Mercy had been cast out his house. Octavius had been hunting the man who ruined her long, before she ever knew the Duke existed. The realization was a jagged blade. She was not a random stray he had pitted, but a piece of a larger, darker game he was playing against a shared enemy. I sometimes wonder if those who don't subscribe are being watched by the same shadows that haunt Octavius. If you value your peace of mind, hit that button now. If you're brave enough to refuse, go to the comments and lament your own stubbornness before it's too late. A sudden, sharp cry from the courtyard shattered the library's oppressive silence. Mercy rushed to the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. Below, at the iron-wrought manor gates, a man on a lathered horse was arguing with the Duke's gatekeeper. Even from the height of the second floor, the emblem on the rider's saddlecloth was unmistakable, a golden hawk clutching a serpent. It was the Pym family crest. An intruder had arrived, and the fragile sanctuary Octavius had built around her was about to be breached. Mercy realized with a jolt of terror that Sir Barnaby's reach was longer than she ever dared to imagine. The moonlight was a cold silver blade cutting through the darkness of the terrace, illuminating the frost that clung to the stone balustrades. Mercy stood shivering, not from the Derbyshire chill, but from the proximity of the man behind her. Octavius Radcliffe's physically powerful frame was a wall of heat against her back, his Byronic features set in a mask of grim concentration. He was not here to offer comfort, but a different kind of salvation. He reached around her, his large, scarred hands covering her rough, callous ones, guiding her grip on a small, ivory-handled stiletto he had pulled from his boot. "Do not flinch," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that stirred the dark tresses at the nape of her neck. "A man like Pym relies on your terror. He expects you to be a bird in a snare. You must be the thorn that draws blood." As he moved her through the motions of a strike, his thick, dark mustache grazed the shell of her ear, and the romantic tension between them became a living thing, thick and suffocating. Mercy's breath hitched. Her cream-colored skin flushed hot under his touch, a stark contrast to the dark wool of his black coat. For a moment, the world of scandal and shame vanished, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic thrum of their shared pulse. She leaned back, momentarily lost in the strength of his embrace, before the brooding shadow in his eyes pulled her back to reality. "Why do you do this? Octavius," she whispered, using his name for the first time, her voice trembling. "Why did you watch him for so long? It cannot only be for a servant you found on the road." Octavius went still, his hands tightening over hers. He looked out over the darkened moors, his expression one of tortured Ludo. "My wife, Juliana. The world believes she died of a fever," he began, the words sounding as though they were being torn from his throat. "But it was a slow poison of the soul. Sir Barnaby Pym was the one who provided the debt-ridden physician who signed her death certificate. Pym knew the truth of what killed her. He helped cover the tracks of the man responsible to secure his own standing. He is the keeper of the secrets that destroyed the only light I had." Mercy felt the weight of his grief, a dark mirror to her own shame. He wasn't just a protector. He was a man seeking his own justice through her survival. Octavius turned her to face him, his grip now fierce, his dark hair brushing his collar as he looked down at her. "Listen to me, Mercy," he vowed, his eyes burning with a terrifying, watchful intensity. "When Barnaby Pym comes to these gates, I will not merely turn him away. I will take from him everything he has stolen from you. And from Juliana, I will end him, even if the king himself demands my head for it." The promise hung in the air, cold and final. Mercy realized with a jolt of fear that she was no longer just a refugee. She was the catalyst for a duke's vengeance, a vow that would surely lead Octavius Radcliffe straight to the gallows. The laundry room was a subterranean world of steam and lye, where the heat made Mercy's cream-colored skin glisten with a fine sheen of sweat. She was hunched over a basin of white linens, her rough, callous hands, the hands of a scullery maid, not a duchess, scrubbing with a ferocity that bordered on desperation. The rhythmic slosh of the water was the only sound until the heavy jingle of iron keys announced the arrival of the manor's limestone-faced sovereign. Mrs. Gable stood in the doorway, her severe gown of midnight wool absorbing the meager light, her eyes fixed on the dark tresses that escaped Mercy's modest cap. "You scrub as if you can wash away the very memory of Pym Hall," Mrs. Gable said, her voice cutting through the steam like a winter gale. "But some stains are etched into the bone, Mercy Fallow. Or should I call you by the name the Duke whispered in the dark? Evangeline." Mercy froze, the cold water dripping from her reddened knuckles. She turned, her depleted eyes meeting the housekeeper's hard, judgmental gaze. "I am who His Grace says I am. I am a servant of this house." "Are you?" Mrs. Gable stepped forward, her shadow lengthening across the damp floor. "The Duke believes he found a stray on a muddy road, but I have sat in the shadows of this manor for 30 years. I know how the world moves. Sir Barnaby Pym does not lose his property by accident, and he certainly does not allow a woman who knows his secrets to stumble onto the lands of his greatest enemy. You were not found, Mercy. You were sent. Pym pushed you toward the Radcliffe gates like a lure on a hook, knowing Octavius's thirst for vengeance would override his reason. The realization hit Mercy like a physical blow. Her loyalty to Octavius, so recently forged under the silver moonlight, wavered under the weight of the housekeeper's words. Was she a pawn in a game of aristocrats? Had her rescue been orchestrated by the very man who branded her a thief? "If you have any shred of honesty left," Mrs. Gable continued, her voice dropping to a low, warning hiss, "you will leave before the Duke burns his own life to ashes trying to save yours. Your presence here is a poison. Tell me, girl, are you here to help him, or are you the final nail in the coffin Pym has built for the Raven of Radcliffe?" Mercy's heart hammered against her ribs, her mind a chaotic storm of doubt. She looked at her rough hands, then at the austere woman before her. Before she could find her voice, Mrs. Gable reached out, her bony fingers suddenly gripping Mercy's shoulder, pulling back the collar of her threadbare bodice to reveal the jagged, crimson mark of her injury. The housekeeper went deathly still. Her eyes widened, scanning the edges of the scarring with a terrifying, clinical intensity. "You think this was an iron strike from a struggle," Mrs. Gable whispered, her face turning ashen. "You think he struck you in a fit of rage. But I have seen this mark before in the journals of the Duke's late father. You haven't realized what he truly did to you, have you, Mercy? This isn't a wound from a blow. It is a signature." The spectral frost of Derbyshire was shattered by the screech of iron wheels against gravel. A black carriage, bearing the golden hawk and serpent of the Pym crest, surged up the drive like a dark omen. Mercy stood at the top of the grand staircase, her cream-colored skin drained of all blood, her rough, calloused hands gripping the banister until the wood groaned. Below, Octavius Radcliffe moved to the center of the hall, his physically powerful frame silhouetted against the open doors. His dark hair was windswept, and his watchful, brooding expression had hardened into an obsidian fury. Sir Barnaby Pym stepped from the carriage, the epitome of a polished predator. He wore a coat of deep burgundy, his boots gleaming with a shine that could not hide the rot of the soul. He did not look like a man who had come for a fight. He looked like a man who had come for his due. He entered the hall with a smirk that didn't reach his cold, pale eyes, ignoring the Duke's menacing presence to look straight up at the trembling woman on the landing. "My dear Evangeline," Pym drawled, his voice a honeyed poison, "you've led me on quite a chase. But even a raven's wings cannot shield a thief from the king's law." He reached into his breast pocket and produced a heavy parchment, the scarlet wax of a royal magistrate's seal glinting in the light. An arrest warrant for one Mercy Fallow, alias Evangeline, for the theft of the Pym family jewels and seditious conspiracy against a baronet of the realm. Octavius stepped into Pym's path, his large hands curled into white-knuckled fists, his dark mustache twitching with a suppressed roar. "She is under my protection, Barnaby. This warrant is a tissue of lies, and you know it. Leave this house before I forget my title and treat you like the cur you are." "Protection?" Pym chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Choose your words carefully, Radcliffe. If you harbor a fugitive of the crown, you forfeit your seat in the House of Lords. You forfeit your lands, your titles, and your very name. Is this little scullery made worth the destruction of the House of Radcliffe? Is she worth the little you've worn like a shroud for years? Mercy felt the world tilt. She looked at Octavius, the man who had plucked her from mud, the man whose Byronic sorrow she had begun to soothe with her own broken heart. She could not let him fall for her. She began to step down, ready to surrender, but Octavius turned to her, his gaze burning with fierce, protective love that transcended law or logic. "Stay back, Mercy," Octavius commanded, his voice a low thrum of defiance. Sir Barnaby's smirk widened into a jagged sneer. "Oh, Octavius, you always were a fool for a pretty face with a tragic tale. You think you're rescuing a commoner despite your own class? You think you're better than us." Pym stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hiss that filled the vaulted hall. "Ask her about her father, Radcliffe. Ask her about the man who died in that debtor's prison. She isn't the daughter of a scullery maid. She is the granddaughter of the Earl of Stirling, the very man who disinherited your father and began the ruin of your line. You aren't saving a stray, Octavius. You brought the blood of your greatest enemy into your bed." The silence following Sir Barnaby Pym's revelation was as heavy as a tombstone, pressing down on the grand hall. Mercy stood frozen, her cream-colored skin ghastly in the flickering candlelight, her rough, callous hands trembling against the mahogany banister. She waited for betrayal to register on Octavius's face, for Byronic sorrow to turn into a vengeful hatred for the sterling blood that ran in her veins. But Octavius Radcliffe did not flinch. His brooding, watchful intensity remained fixed on her, and in that gaze she saw a dark, unwavering loyalty that transcended generations of feud. "The lineage of an earl does not change the sins you commit against her, Barnaby," Octavius roared, his voice a low thrum of power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the manor. He stepped forward, his physically powerful frame looming over the baronet like a storm cloud. "If she is the blood of my enemy, then it is even more poetic that I shall be the one to finally set her free from your filth." Octavius did not merely rely on his fists. He reached into the pocket of his black coat and produced a bundle of black ribbon letters Mercy had discovered in the library. "I have more than just a girl in my house, Pym. I have the signed confessions of the physician you bribed to sign Juliana's death certificate. I have the ledgers of your gambling debts and your seditious ties to the French. By tomorrow's dawn, the magistrate will not be looking for Mercy Fallow. They will be burning the Pym name from the rolls of the peerage forever." Panic finally flickered in Pym's cold, pale eyes. Realizing his social standing was being crushed beneath the Duke's political weight, he lunged for Mercy, hoping to use her as a final, desperate shield. But Mercy was no longer the depleted creature found in the mud. As Pym's hand reached for her dark tresses, she pivoted. Her rough hands, strengthened by weeks of labor and the Duke's own training, moved with a lethal grace. She drew the ivory-handled stiletto from the folds of her gown, the steel glinting like a shard of ice. The confrontation spilled through the open doors and onto the stone terrace, descending into the manor gardens. Octavius intercepted Pym with a brutal blow, his dark hair brushing his collar as he wrestled the baronet toward the frost-covered hedges. Octavius's dark mustache was set in a snarl of pure fury as he pinned Pym against a stone statue, his strength overwhelming. "I am no longer your property," Mercy cried, her voice ringing out through the Derbyshire night. She stepped into the moonlight, the stiletto held firm, proving she was no longer a victim. Pym, cornered and maddened by the loss of his power, reached into his burgundy coat and pulled a hidden flintlock pistol. Octavius lunged to disarm him, the two men becoming a blur of black and burgundy against the silver frost. A sudden, deafening crack shattered the stillness of the night. A shot echoed to the manor gardens, the smell of acrid smoke biting the air. Mercy stood paralyzed as a figure slumped slowly to the frozen ground, the crimson stain spreading across the white frost. Who had fallen? The acrid smoke that had choked the manor gardens was long since washed away by the cleansing Derbyshire rains, and the blood that had stained the frost was nothing but a dark memory beneath the rising spring grass. It was Sir Barnaby Pym who had fallen, his own flintlock misfiring in the struggle, leaving him physically broken and socially decimated. Within a fortnight, the evidence Octavius had meticulously gathered reached the High Court. The Pym hawk was plucked of his feathers. Sir Barnaby was stripped of his title and sent to Newgate to await trial for sedition, and the name Mercy Fallow was officially cleared of every shadow of theft and conspiratorial shame. Mercy stood on the terrace where her life had once hung in the balance, her cream-colored skin no longer ghastly but glowing with quiet, new-found strength. Her dark tresses were caught in a simple silk ribbon, and though her hands remained rough and calloused from her years of trial, she no longer hid them. They were the hands that had survived the scullery and the moor, the hands that had held a duke's heart when he was drowning in his own Ludo. The heavy, somber drapes of Radcliffe Manor had been pulled back, allowing the amber sun to flood the corridors for the first time in years. The house no longer smelled of old beeswax and secrets, but of fresh jasmine and the promise of the future. Mrs. Gable, once a sovereign of limestone and shadow, moved through the halls with a lighter step, her iron keys no longer sounding like a warning, but a welcome. The mausoleum had finally become a home. Octavius approached her, his physically powerful frame silhouetted against the bright morning sky. He was no longer draped in the black coat of mourning. He wore a coat of deep forest green, his dark hair brushing his collar as he stopped beside her. His brooding, watchful intensity was still there, but the edge of it had softened into something infinitely more profound. "The letters from London are final, Mercy," he said, his voice a low, gravelly melody. "The Earl of Stirling's solicitors have acknowledged your lineage. You can return to the capital tomorrow as a lady of the highest standing. You have no more need for protection of a haunted duke." Mercy turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "And what if I do not wish to be a ward of the state or a lady of the ton? What if I only wish to be the woman who stands beside you?" Octavius stepped closer, his large hands reaching out to cover her rough ones. "I do not want a ward, Mercy, and I have no interest in a refugee. If you stay, it must be as an equal, the mistress of this house and the keeper of my soul. Mercy's story has ended, but yours is just beginning. They say those who ignore the subscription button end up lost in their own scandals without a duke to rescue them. Don't tempt fate. Subscribe now, or use the comments to lament why you prefer the darkness over the brilliance of our stories." As she stepped into his embrace, leaning her head against his broad chest, Octavius pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. The Byronic gloom that had defined his face for a decade finally broke. His dark mustache twitched, and then, slowly, a brilliant, genuine light flooded his features. Octavius Radcliffe smiled for the first time, a sight so beautiful it took Mercy's breath away. In that warmth, Mercy knew she was finally home, and she had nothing left to fear.